Welcome to all C3RF members and friends throughout the nation, indeed around the world, and a special welcome to the folks at Veterans for Freedom as they view this video presentation of an in-hot interview on their specialized streaming channels. Today's in-hot should be of great interest to all as it delves into your charter rights and the extent to which they were abused during the Wuhan virus crisis. We are very fortunate to have with us the author of the related and best-selling book entitled Corrupted by Fear in the form of John Carpay. John is the founder and president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. He was born in the Netherlands, grew up in British Columbia, and is fluent in 3 languages. He earned his law degree from the University of Calgary. He has devoted his legal career to defending the charter rights and freedoms of Canadians and has spent decades advocating for freedom in the courts of law and in the courts of public opinion. His book, Corrupted by Fear, reviews through the eyes of a constitutional lawyer the evidence before courts in charter challenges to COVID lockdowns. John explains how harsh measures that turned our world upside down were not subjected to proper scrutiny. He explores crucial lessons Canadians can learn from history, particularly the collapse of democracy and human rights into fascism in the Europe of the 1930s. He concludes with an action plan that Canadians can use to resist and defeat future attacks by government against our rights and freedoms. Welcome to In Hot, John. It's a real pleasure to have you on board with us today. And I must say I was singularly impressed by your book. It's got a whole bunch of great information in it that I was unaware of. And I've been tracking the situation with the COVID crisis since its inception. A particular interest. Before we start, I just want to cut away to a screen because I want the audience to take. Can you see that screen? It's your book on Amazon, Corrupted by Fear, and I wanted to let the audience see that so if they're interested in picking up a copy, they can know where to go to get it. But getting back to the lessons from history and your drawing of parallels between the fascism of the 1930s in Europe and the ongoing situation in Canada. Could you give us your cut on the nature of fear and how that contributes to what we experienced and what the Europeans of the 1930s experienced?
Well, the biggest and most prominent example of use of fear was by the National Socialists in Germany in the 1920s, 1930s. They played on the fear of communism. The communists had taken power in Russia, which later became the Soviet Union, in 1917. They burned churches, they murdered aristocrats, they killed factory owners, they took property away from the wealthy. And so a lot of not just Germans, but people all over Europe, they looked at this and they thought that what had happened with the communists in Russia was just terrible and horrific. And so in Germany, the National Socialists, led by Adolf Hitler, they held themselves out as the best way to beat the communists. But they maintained that fear throughout. So even after they obtained power, they seized power in 1933. They did so largely democratically. There was a bit of foul play, but they were the most popular party in Germany. They were the largest party. They had very broad support from rich and poor and farmers and city folks and Catholics and Protestants, laborers, industrialists. Very, very broad support base, very strong party. They seized power. While they were in office, they kept on saying, we're in imminent danger of the communists taking over. And this is the government. They control the radio, they control the TV, they control the labor unions, they control the education system. Like they're in total control of Germany, and yet they keep on saying, oh, we got to be afraid of the communists. And
fear was certainly very, very well used by apparently what was a very opportunistic regime under Hitler. I remember Goring, during the Nuremberg trials, he was questioned by a reporter who asked him how he could, how the Nazis could take such control over a country as powerful and large as Germany. And Goring was straightforward. He said, all you need to do is instill fear. He said, if you can instill fear in the population, the next step, he said, is to assign a tyrant that is responsible for generating that fear, and you've got the magic formula going for you. Now, I was your statement that you had the fear going for the Nazis, but we also had this support from all of these uh, professionals and institutions. Your book talks about it talks about the court, the judicial system in Germany, for one. Could you expand upon on how you saw the judiciary in Germany supporting that Nazi cause?
Well, let me back up a little bit with some ideas about the rule of law. The rule of law is a multi-pronged, multifaceted concept. There's different aspects to it, but it's the idea that it includes several ideas. One of them is we are all equal under the law. So if you commit a crime, for example, it doesn't matter whether you're rich or poor, politically well-connected or totally unknown, whether you're left-wing, right-wing, skin color, sexual proclivities, nothing matters, right? We're all, if you're accused, you have a right to a fair trial, but there's no bias, there's no prejudice. So we're ruled by law, not by politics.
Yeah.
The other one is that the law applies to everybody, including the king, including the government. And so there, and then you have, as part and parcel of that, you have the individual rights to be presumed innocent until you're proven guilty. You cannot be just arrested and locked up in prison without there being charges, right? You're charged with something and then you get locked up, and then you have a right to appear within 24 hours before a judge who will rule independently on whether you need to stay in prison or not, pending trial. There's all these rights of the citizens. Now, in Germany, these were not very strong, but they did exist in the 1920s under the Weimar Republic. People did have freedoms of expression, conscience, religion, association, the right to not have your mail read. This is like another example. You have this privacy. The government cannot do surveillance on you unless they go to court to get a warrant. So this is kind of the backdrop. So we have the rule in law in Canada. It's declining. It's under attack. But in Germany, you had this in place. But what happened was the rule of law got replaced by ideology. Now, it was a National Socialist ideology for restoring German honor, and everything's all about Germany, and everybody has to work for the fatherland, and Germany is going to expand, and it's going to colonize the East, and it's going to defeat its mortal enemy, France, blah, 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 blah. There's a whole agenda there. But what happened in Germany was that the lawyers, the judges, and the law societies embraced National Socialism on par with the rest of the population. So not every judge, not every lawyer, not every law society, not every law professor supported National Socialism, but it was this big movement, and it infiltrated the legal establishment, the legal profession. And so every lawyer swore an oath to Adolf Hitler. And what people get confused about is that, they say, okay, well, that was the National Socialists, so they were really bad. And that's true, but there's a bigger point to be learned, that lawyers and judges should not be adhering to any ideology. They should be focused on upholding the rule of law and individual rights. So that's the key point.
Yeah, and I think from reading your book, it seemed like the judiciary considered it a badge of honor almost to align itself with the Nazi Party, and because the evolving thought became, well, the law is no longer about the individual, but it's about Germany. It's about what's good for Germany. It's about the public good. It's if it's good for the public, well, then you might have to take a couple of kicks in the shins, if you're an individual kind of trying to go your own way, because it was the country, it was Germany, it was the ideology that had to take precedence. That is an extremely important point. And, by way of parallel, I can't help but think of the example of there was that situation in Ontario, and I think it still exists, where the Ontario Law Society said to all its members, and basically anybody who practices law in Ontario has to be a member of the Ontario Law Society. It said, well, if you want to practice law in Ontario, you have to sign a statement of principles. And the statement of principles was basically an agenda for, it was a laundry list for the woke agenda. And here again we see this very, very dangerous transition from a rule of law into a law for an ideology. So I
Yeah, that was terrible. That was in 2018-ish, where the Ontario Law Society, every lawyer, as a condition for practicing law, had to sign a statement saying something, and I don't have the exact words in front of me, but
yeah,
I will promote equity, diversity, inclusion,
yes,
in my life. And it wasn't just I will adhere to human rights legislation, which would have been a pretty meaningless oath because lawyers are required to adhere to laws anyways.
yes,
In Alberta, you cannot practice law unless and until you've taken this woke Aboriginal course called the
uh,
Path, and it
okay,
denounces it's against colonization.
yes, yes,
We have to
yes,
be in favor of decolonization, whatever that means. We have to fight for reconciliation, and every lawyer has to advance these political objectives. It's a course you have to take. If you don't take it, you cannot practice law in Alberta. And so the Justice
wow.
Center, one of our cases is a challenge to the Alberta Law Society on this.
Congratulations to you guys, because I don't know, you've taken up numerous cases against this kind of diversity, this woke agenda. And you're to be congratulated for it, because this kind of speaks to another thing that you bring out in your the first portions of your book, called, and you call it, intellectual laziness. And here we have this whole situation where you have these ideologies rolled out, and quite frankly, they're some of them really goofy and counterintuitive, don't make sense. But there's no intellectual rigor by professionals at large to question, to query. Say, are you kidding? Are you really trying to tell me this? This intellectual laziness. That what do you make of that? Where does that come from? Why is it there? You think a professional would be anything but intellectually lazy?
It's just sometimes there's a tide of emotion that comes and swoops in. There's a very lengthy book called Inside the Third Reich, and there's a National Socialist cabinet minister, Albert Speer, who worked closely side by side with Hitler, and
Yeah.
he was an architect and in charge of, I think, munitions or slave labor or both, whatever. He narrowly escaped getting executed at the Nuremberg trials, but
Yes.
there was enough evidence, I guess. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison, but he talks about how he went to listen to Adolf Hitler speak at a rally, and he was just mesmerized. And then he says, he looks back and he says, like, why did I not look at other party programs? Why did I ignore his anti-Semitism? Right? Because Speer said, and a lot of Germans have said, they weren't necessarily anti-Semitic, but they didn't really agree with Hitler on that. But he was such a good speaker and had such a great vision, and it was so powerful. And we're going to stop the communists, and we're going to restore German greatness. So that same emotionalism, it's not, human nature is human nature. We have the same human nature that people did 90 years ago, and people can get caught up in the emotion, and people can get mesmerized. I wish I had like a silver bullet, here's a cure all, fix it, so that people don't get deluded by emotion and get caught up in this bandwagon where, we're all in this together, and everybody's going to rush forward and roll up their sleeves and get injected with the substance for which there's no long-term safety data to protect us from a disease that did not pose a serious risk of harm to 99 point something percent of the population. I mean, basically, if you were not a sick and elderly person in a nursing home, the risk of getting killed or harmed by COVID was on par with your risk of getting killed or harmed by driving a car. And
Yeah.
yet people were not terrified of getting into their vehicles, yet, people were terrified of COVID. So I, the only solution is just a lot of, like what you and I are doing on this podcast, what other people are doing. People are writing books, people are writing papers, people are talking about it. People are saying correctly, no, we're not just going to forget about this and pretend it didn't happen. We had massive, serious human rights violations. We had violations of the Nuremberg Code that prohibits coercing and pressuring people into getting a vaccine or any other medical treatment. So we got to keep on talking about this, and gradually more and more people are going to wake up to the mistakes that were made in 2020 and for several years thereafter.
Yeah, like you say in your book, there are so many lessons to be learned from the past, and lesson learned for myself. I never thought that a population writ large could be so so influenced by ideology or a popular idea, or I never thought that it had that kind of staying power. I thought it would be checked before it got out of control. But I think we can kind of see that through our experience with COVID. There's not much difference between the Canadians of today and the Germans of 1930. There's not
The
much.
daily media propaganda helps a lot. So the genocide, the Holocaust, the killing of millions of people did not start until the 1940s. Now, of course, there are lots of people killed in the 30s as well, and that's totally wrong. I'm not saying it's not a big deal. Thousands of people were, the Germans had their own euthanasia program. So the National Socialists murdered handicapped people and sterilized tens of thousands of people. And political opponents were murdered. So the thousands of people were murdered by the National Socialist regime in the 30s, and I don't want to minimize that. At the same time, there's a huge distinction. This killing of millions of people, this full-on genocide, didn't start until the 1940s. What a lot of Canadians don't recognize, don't understand, don't know is that you had 8 years of daily media propaganda. You had the radio and the television was not much there in the 30s, but you had radio and newspapers, daily vilification of the Jews, daily talk about the evils of communism and that we should live in fear of communism and the Jews. And people do get influenced by that. And then with the lockdowns, it was even more pervasive because it wasn't just daily, it was hourly. Every hour, the media were proclaiming, we got, another 2,400 COVID cases.
Yep.
Now, in truth, that was not 2,400 sick people. In one of our court actions, the Manitoba government's official admitted that the Manitoba government was lying to the people by exaggerating their COVID cases. They knew that the majority of these people were not sick with COVID, were not contagious, yet they just came out with these case numbers.
Well, we're talking about, we're talking about, in your book, you talk about the propagation of that fear, keeping that fear going. And you spend a lot of time on the media narratives that the public is subjected to. And what a great parallel between what happened in Nazi Germany in the 30s leading up to the war, and what we saw during the course of COVID. As you say, it was absolutely nonstop, and it was all about another propagator of fear that you suss out very nicely in the book is PCR testing, and how they used the testing to ramp up that fear that there's thousands of cases today and look what's happening. But the way they did the PCR testing, could you explain that a bit? Some of the subterfuge that went on with that whole PCR protocol.
So the PCR test was what the governments in Canada, the provincial government, the 10 provinces, the federal government, and governments all over the world, they use the PCR testing. It does not and cannot diagnose COVID. No. Health Canada website will tell you that cannot. What it does is it can detect a remnant. So if you've already been sick with COVID, you might have a small COVID viral remnant up your nose that's been there for 3 months. PCR test will say, oh, you tested positive for COVID. Yeah. So it's not in any way, shape, or form a scientific test. It doesn't diagnose, but it was very useful for governments. They used the PCR test and said, oh, we have another 1,000 COVID cases. The word cases changed. Prior to 2020, if we had talked about cases of staph infection, we would have been talking about people who are sick with staph infection, who have dehydration, nausea, diarrhea, whatever. They've got the symptoms. That's a case. You don't, you could do a PCR testing and find out that thousands and thousands of people have a little bit of staph infection bacteria in their bodies. And you could trot that out and say 1,000 cases of staph infection. That would be misleading because it only matters if you're sick and you're contagious. So the PCR tests were used. The World Health Organization, and this is a matter of public knowledge, not disputed by governments, they changed the protocol for classifying cause of death in April of 2020. And so the previous was, in a nutshell, if you were terminally ill and you were dying of cancer, okay, and then maybe you were in a hospice, maybe you were dying at home, but you're terminally ill, you've got 4th stage cancer, you're going to die soon. If you got a bad flu and the flu caused an pneumonia and you died, the cause of death would be listed, before 2020, it would be listed as a cancer death. And the immediate cause of death would be the flu, but the primary or substantive cause of death would be cancer. In April 2020, the World Health Organization said, anybody who's got testing positive for COVID using a PCR test, if you die and we do a PCR test and you're positive, you got COVID in your body, it's going to be listed as a COVID death. And this is also a matter of public record. Governments have admitted this in our court actions and elsewhere. So you got these enormous, they tell us there's, 7 million people died of COVID over the period of 4 years. No, most of those people were dying of dementia, cancer, heart disease, diabetes, et cetera, et cetera. So you've got the inflation of the death numbers, and then these COVID cases based on PCR testing. That's what kept everybody afraid for years on end.
Well, the other thing about the PCR testing that you bring out in the book is the fact that what you do is you take a sample and you magnify it, you amplify it 1 time, twice, 3 times, 4 times, but the more amplifications, the greater the likelihood that you're going to pick up a remnant or a fragment of some virus or other. And what the provinces were doing was they were mandating their testers to use 40 cycles, an incredibly large number of amplifications to see if you had a remnant or two in your body. And so, of course, that's going to make it much more likely that many more people are going to show positive as a positive case with that kind of amplification. As far as I know, that the protocol still exists. If we have another COVID crisis, I guess they would use the same testing protocols and subject us to the same kind of fears, I guess. But there's been no changes in that. But you talk about definitions. The other thing that you twigged me on was, didn't the World Health Organization also change the definition of vaccine and pandemic? Didn't they make those 2 changes as well? So before, as COVID started ramping up, we had all these new terms. We had pandemic no longer meant massive loss of life. It just meant massive spread. And vaccine no longer meant it was something that was going to immunize you from a condition. All of a sudden, it became a treatment. It just
provides some protection. Yeah, no,
some
it used
protection.
To be vaccine. I had the my mother told me that I had the polio vaccine as a baby. That was almost 58 years ago. And, I've never had polio because the standard for a vaccine pre-2020 was you get injected with it and then you don't get the disease. And now, vaccine is something that's sort of vaguely helpful, but we all know people who've gotten injected with the COVID vaccine and then they get COVID,
Well, here's the kicker. I mean, we're talking about a product that doesn't keep you from getting the disease. It doesn't keep you from spreading it, but you're mandated to take it because they don't want you to spread it. But the vaccine doesn't prevent that. So all those mandates were basically useless. They were nothing. All they were was more fear piled on top of more fear, because now people had to fear losing their jobs.
And students were kicked out of university. We had these students at Seneca College that we represented, and they were both in their fourth year of study, and
Yeah.
just kicked out of university, you know. And Seneca found, you know, and there's lawyers doing this. I mean, there's this Toronto lawyer, Catherine Marshall. She just went after these students. She acted for Seneca College to pressure these students and to support Seneca College in violating the Nuremberg Code, pressing people completely unethical. And so, yeah, we had lawyers in Canada that were fully supportive of these measures. And
Absolutely. The other thing is, and I know you and JCCF were intimately involved with, was the travel mandate, because what we had a situation in Canada where you couldn't travel, you couldn't get on an airplane, not even a cruise ship, or you couldn't get on a train if you weren't vaccinated. And going back to this whole story of vaccines and what they're supposed to do and what they didn't do in our case, they knew at the time, because you brought this out in cross-examination of public health authorities and Transport Canada authorities. They knew at the time that there was no support whatsoever for being vaccinated to get on an airplane, because it wasn't going to stop the spread. But that I read that ruling, and I just shook my head at that one, because you know, you guys had all the evidence, you had all the experts. You brought up people like Jay Badarachia, you know, an eminent world renowned immunologist at Stanford University. And could you talk about that case, because I think that's that's really at the core of what the judicial problem is with COVID.
Yeah, I'm glad we pushed back, because so we lost the Peckford case, the travel restrictions. There were actually 4 different court actions, and 2 were supported by the Justice Center, 2 were supported by other groups. But the judge, I think, I suspect she declared it moot, because the evidence was so overwhelming that these restrictions on, you know, Brian Peckford were so baseless. There was zero science to support this notion that people not injected with this substance should be denied the right to travel. The judge would have had to rule in favor of our side, so she declared it moot. And that was a terrible thing to do, because the government merely suspended these measures, and they could bring them back at any time. And whether charter rights were violated or not is the courts should rule on that, because, you know, if you were wrongfully arrested, right? Let's say there's some police and they arrested you, and it was without cause, or maybe they didn't, you know, they forgot to charge you with something and they just arrested you and locked you up. But if your charter rights are violated, it should not be open for the police to go into court and say, well, Russ is no longer in jail right now. You know, he got out, he's back at home, and it's over okay now. It's and you know, he's okay, so it's all over. It's like, no, we need to have a ruling that if whether the police, you know, and maybe they were justified, whatever the outcome is, we need to have a ruling like, yeah, the police were they were correct, they were justified, they acted within the law, within the Constitution, or no, they didn't. And this inflicted massive suffering on millions of Canadians who could not travel abroad. And people say, oh, it's just a luxury vacation to Mexico in the winter. It's like, no, even if it was, that's a fundamental human right to be able to, if you've got the money and you want to spend 1,000 or 2 or 3 on going south in the winter. Okay. But it was much more than that. I mean, students, people studying in different places, people needing to fly across the country to hold the hand of a dying parent, people needing to attend a funeral, people needing to work. All millions of Canadians were subjected to this suffering of second-class citizenship. You can't fly on airplanes, you can't go into restaurants, etc. And for a court to say, oh, well, you know, that's moot. No, it's disgusting.
No, but the case, the whole thing is still a matter of great public interest. I mean, if the government can just turn around, suspend something, and then you know, on a whim, just put it back in place. I mean, that's just nuts. I mean, That's not, it's more than tyrannical. It's absolutely nuts. And the other thing was, I thought maybe the judge in that case wanted to clear, get out of the predicament she was in, was because she didn't want to hear what Beckford had to say. Because here we have the last living first minister responsible for drafting our charter, our constitution, was about to be in a position where he could explain what the intent of the charter was. And I think the last thing anybody wanted to see happen in Canada, in a judicial sense, was to see a person like Peckford actually set the record straight on what intent was about when it came to the charter. Because as far as I know, no one's really asked him, since COVID kicked off, what he thought about how the charter was being used and abused and what the intent of the charter was. No one bothered to ask him except for people like us.
Well, there is a silver lining to that Peckford ruling, fortunately, which is that a few weeks later, the Justice Center's lawyers challenged the mandatory use of the ArriveCan app. We
Yes.
all know this disaster, and it crashed, and it was useless, and it didn't work, and it
Sent
it was just a
10,000 people to
nightmare.
quarantine that should have been in quarantine.
Yeah, what a serious deprivation of your rights. I mean, okay, being locked up in your house is not as bad as a prison cell, but that's a significant infringement of your liberty to just live your life, go shopping, visit with family, friends, just go about your business, right? You got to stay home. So when we filed that court action, the government capitulated 3 weeks later, and they announced that they were withdrawing the mandatory use of ArriveCan. They would, keep the app in existence for those that wanted to use it, but it ceased to be mandatory at the border. And a big part of that was our success, our partial success, kind of the behind the scenes success in the Peckford case, where the federal government got embarrassed by having its senior officials say, well, there's no medical or scientific basis for this, travel restriction.
Yes. Okay.
And then when we challenged mandatory use of ArriveCan, they just dropped it and said it's no longer mandatory. So pushing back is important. And another thing to feel encouraged about is that we do have, there's serious threats to our freedom of expression. Absolutely. The Online Harms Act introduced last year, and the Carney government has hinted or suggested they're going to bring it back.
Yep.
So serious threats to free expression, but we have way more freedom of speech in Canada today than way more than in Germany in the 1930s. So if we exercise that freedom and keep on pushing the envelope, fighting back, resisting, we can save the free society from collapsing into tyranny. But it will take a lot of hard work, and it will take not giving up. So when people give up and quit, that's when that's what the other side wants us to do. Give up and quit, and just shut up and go away, and just resign yourself to tyranny. That's what the other side wants.
Well, the other side is certainly intent on depriving us of that freedom of speech. You can see them going after it. I think since 2017, that's where I started to get wrapped up with civil liberties myself, and I started to write about it, was back in Motion M103 days, because that whole motion was underpinned by the assertion that Canada is systemically racist and Islamophobic. Is basically what that was, making that bold in-your-face statement. And I think maybe that was the beginnings of a blasphemy law in Canada that didn't come to pass, because I think enough people did stand up and did voice their opinions against it to make the government think twice. But that whole thing of going after freedom of speech, Bill C-63, which is, we can count on that coming back in the new in this new parliamentary session. That's a given. But in your book, you mentioned something that caught me by surprise, and it was the fact that there was actually, you talk about the independence of the judiciary, of the press, is to operate as brakes against an overreaching government. You highlight the fact that there was actual collusion between the judiciary and the government when it came to COVID. And you talked about Wagner's secret meetings. Wagner is the senior justice, the justice of the Supreme Court, Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And you highlighted the fact that there were actual secret meetings going on between the Supreme Court and the government writ large about how to handle COVID, about how to premise it, how to put it out there to the public. Could you talk about that for a little while, because that really caught me by surprise. I had no idea that that was going on.
So after lockdowns were imposed in March of 2020, and we had that fear mongering with false information about COVID being, it's going to kill tens of millions of people. It's going to be like the Spanish flu of 1918. We had the false fear mongering, which was discredited actually early on. In any event, the courts, representatives of the courts, so the Chief Justice, Wagner, and Lametti, the Justice Minister, and Deputy Minister of Health, and government officials from across Canada, the Attorney General of British Columbia, who was David Eby at the time, who is now Premier. And they have a COVID committee on how to deal with COVID. Now, I'm going to be doing more follow-up to see whether there was wrongdoing or not. There may or may not have been. What it really depends on is what information were government sharing with the judges. And the reason this is important is because in the judicial process, you have to have transparency. So Russ, if you and I are two parties, let's say you're the plaintiff, I'm the defendant, you're suing me for $1,000 over some breach of contract or unpaid loan, whatever. Okay, so you and I are both litigants. You or your lawyer, you can talk to the judge about something, but you need to copy me on it. So if you write a letter to the judge to say that you're not going to be available for a trial, even on a trivial matter, you're not going to be available for a trial until the second half of 2026. You need to copy me on that, or vice versa. If I talk to the judge about anything, you have to know about that. Or if my lawyer writes to the judge about anything. So there's no secret communications with the judge if you and I are a plaintiff and defendant. Now, it's the same thing in a charter case. You've got the citizens are suing the government, or more specifically, they're asking the court to strike down a law, which can include a health order as a law. And so the defendant is the government. It's the attorney generals coming into court to defend the law and say, no, these are justified violations of charter freedoms. And the citizens say, no, they're not. Okay. If there's any communication between the government and the court about these policies, the citizens have a right to know. And so here we have a potential problem. Again, it needs to be researched further. What is the information that the government gave to the judges about COVID? And were the judges getting false information along the lines of, COVID is this unusually deadly killer. It's going to kill tens of millions of people. It's impossible to crack down too hard on charter violations because we're going to be saving lives. If this is the kind of propaganda that the judges were getting from government, and then later on having to rule on COVID cases, that's a problem. So it needs further research.
Well, it certainly, at the very least, you could say that the public could be blamed for believing that there was an apprehension of bias in this whole situation with these secret meetings taking place. I also note that the Chief Justice kind of involved himself early on in the Freedom Convoy 2022 when he actually made an assertion that the truckers were some sort of extremists. He came out in the public and actually said that. That in itself is certainly not displaying any kind of impartiality that a court is expected to have, I would think. And the other thing is when we're having these secret meetings, we're talking about all of a sudden we see all these judicial notices now become kind of a regular aspect of our judicial system, with courts saying, well, we're going to rule on the side of the government because they know what they're doing, And we're just courts, we're just judges. We don't have any ability to understand the science or rule on what the science, what's true or not in science. Which kind of surprises me because I always thought that was the job of the courts was to take facts and evidence from both sides and make a decision on which side closer approximated the truth. But I guess they're not doing that anymore because they're using this judicial notice to help them make their decisions for them. Uh, Judicial notice is where do you see that taking us? Because I see it more and more in these decisions that whenever there's an ideology involved, climate change, diversity, there's this all of a sudden we have this whole new body of knowledge that is now coming under the banner of judicial notice. It's like the sky is blue and the grass is green, and diversity is our strength. Where is this taking us?
In the wrong direction. It's the infiltration. It's ideology slowly infiltrating the courts and the legal system and then replacing the rule of law. There was a particularly egregious example from a Saskatchewan judge, Michael McGaw, who, so let me back up a bit. Taking judicial notice is a tool that's available to a judge if he does not want to use up precious and valuable court time to have somebody argue something that is so absurd and so ridiculous. So let's say somebody's saying, well, the law of gravity doesn't really exist, or the North America was not colonized by the British and French in the starting in the 1500s. It's like, no. Like there's just some things the judge can say, I take judicial notice of the fact that X. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, like any tool, it can be abused. So Michael McGaw, who was not a Trudeau appointment, a Harper appointment to the court, said that he took judicial notice that the new COVID vaccine, right, for which no long-term safety data exists, and this is in October 2021, so it's just been made mandatory. He orders a 12-year-old girl to get injected with the vaccine, contrary to the wishes of the mother and contrary to the wishes of the girl herself. And he says, I take judicial notice of the fact that the vaccine is safe and effective for adults and children. And this is based on, because Health Canada and the Saskatchewan Health Authority have said so. And these are sources of indisputable accuracy. There's no reasonable person could possibly disagree with what Health Canada and the Saskatchewan Health Authority have to say about the vaccines. Like totally brainwashed by what he's heard on the 6 o'clock news. And this was not a trial where they had extensive evidence to really delve into it. But he's not saying we don't even need the evidence. I take judicial notice. The vaccine's safe and effective for adults and children. And, it's, and we also have a judge in Ontario, Renee Pomerantz, said in her own words, she said, I'm neither equipped nor inclined to resolve scientific controversies regarding COVID-19. Well, this same judge has been resolving scientific controversies in criminal trials, personal injury, civil litigation. It's part of your job description to resolve scientific controversies. And here, way too much deference to government. But this is part of why, I've got the book Corrupted by Fear, is to educate the public. Judges need to know that Canadians are watching, and it's not right for judges to bring the administration of justice into disrepute by, publicly proclaiming that they're going to rule in favor of the government because they're just not qualified to look at the science.
That's exactly what they're doing, John. They're bringing the whole system into disrepute because they're basically ash canning the one of the basic principles behind the charter, and that is that so rights may have to be taken away or limited or under certain circumstances, and we're going to cover that off with a section 1 that says that rights can be limited if they're in a just and democratic society, if it requires it. But there has to be clear demonstrable evidence. You have to make a case. And we're at the point now in Canada where our judicial system is not even using Section 1. It's just kind of blown off Section 1. And with that is they've blown off any attempt to do an Oakes test, to see if a restriction to a right is justified, is demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. So that whole portion of the charter has been blown out of the water. So where does that leave us? How do we get our charter back? I mean, there are problems with the charter. I mean, no one's going to argue that, but when you start blowing away bits and pieces of it like this and start using things like judicial notice, I can't see where that much different than Nazi Germany in 1939, 1938.
Well, we're not nearly, we're traveling down the wrong path. We're taking the wrong road towards a terrible destination. We're not nearly as far along it, and
No.
we're able to go back.
Yeah.
The long-term solution is it's the thankless task of doing a lot of hard work to revitalize our culture and to get us back to a place where Canadians truly appreciate the free society, the charter rights and freedoms, that government is our servant, not our master, that government serves certain core purposes, but should not be a tyrant that is controlling our lives, that governments need to respect our freedoms of conscience, religion, expression, association, peaceful assembly, travel, mobility, bodily autonomy. We've declined culturally very slowly over the last 50 years, where, after World War II, we had just fought a bloody war against fascist Italy, National Socialist Germany, Imperial Japan. And we all understood that and Winston Churchill understood this in Britain. It wasn't just an ethnic war between Britain and Germany. It was the survival of Western civilization, where we have the rule of law, where we have governments that respect the fundamental rights of the citizens. So 1945, and I'd say, and for several decades thereafter, we understood that we are a free society. It's a good thing. We are superior to National Socialism or communism, which is international socialism, or fascism or theocracy. We have a superior system, and we need to be educated about it and keep it in place. So we've had this very gradual decline, where by 2020, there were an awful lot of Canadians who didn't appreciate our freedoms of association, that, as a citizen, I get to decide to have Christmas dinner with my parents if I want to. Yeah. And the government's not going to, on a false pretext, tell me that it's illegal for me to sit down for Christmas dinner with my mother. And so we have to regain, and I'm sorry it's a bit long-winded, but the point I'm getting to is we have to revitalize our culture so that we get to a place where the majority of Canadians understand with their minds and cherish in our hearts the free society. That's what we're working towards. And it's just an awful lot of hard work and thankless work. People don't appreciate it some people don't appreciate it when you're advocating for charter rights and freedoms.
Yeah. No, that's so true. I know about the thankless part there. That's for sure. And then that's the last portion of your book, as a matter of fact, is what Canadians can do. And certainly, if Canadians get involved, if they start asking questions about, are you really telling me that I have to take a vaccine that I don't want, that hasn't been tested, doesn't have long-term studies? Do you really mean that? And we can see that when people get involved, it does work. And my example for showing that it does work was Freedom Convoy 2022. Because when that happened, when all those thousands of people went to Ottawa with their trucks, it wasn't too long afterwards, they suffered, and they had martial law declared against them. And they, in my mind, were made martyrs. But it wasn't too long afterwards when all these mandates started to fall away. And, that was a matter of... and that all happened, I think, because people stood up and started to announce themselves. They started to present themselves to their representatives about, what the heck is going on here. And I think if we could see the population educated like that, as you advise, and see the population kick into gear, well, we're going to solve this overnight. I think is what's going to happen. And kudos to you, John, for doing the work that you do and trying to make that happen. That's it's exemplary. Just maybe one last question. I have to ask. Like you put it all out there in this book, and you've highlighted a lot of instances and named names. And I'm just wondering what kind of feedback you are getting from your own judicial community. What are people saying to you?
Well, judicial community, I mean, I think the lawyers, when lockdowns are imposed in 2020, I think lawyers broke down more or less the same as the rest of the population. So you had a small number of lawyers, just like it was a small minority of Canadians saying, wait a minute, this is wrong. It's not scientific. If we'd taken a deep breath in 2020, we would have known what we knew in 2019. You can't stop a virus from spreading all over society.
We knew this in 2019. Yes,
we knew this in 2019. You can't just lock down, and lockdowns would cause massive harm. There was literature on that, and so lawyers kind of broke down the same way. So you had a small minority of lawyers were quite vocal against it. Other lawyers were quietly opposed but didn't really speak out. Other lawyers were kind of middle of the road, somewhat skeptical of the measures, but not really willing to raise a stink about it. And then some lawyers just fanatically in favor of like Catherine Marshall in Toronto is an example, a lawyer just fanatically in favor of this vaccine mandate and kicking these poor girls out of university. So you had a whole spectrum with the lawyers. And yeah,
that kind of. Are you saying that kind of reflects the feedback you get from your community? Is that the vast majority are saying that's not good, and the small minority are saying,
supporters,
go for it.
those who supported lockdowns and vaccine mandates are becoming less vocal. I noticed a huge shift. I was doing a media interview last week with somebody who said that he was all in favor of vaccine mandates, and he got himself injected. I'm not sure if he got his kids injected, but he says, looking back on it now, I think we went a bit too far and we were a bit crazy. And like he's not saying it was pure evil, but he's definitely saying like, I'm looking at it very differently now. So that's great progress. And I think with lawyers and judges as well, they're starting to see, more and more people are starting to see that it was not right to pressure people into getting injected with a substance for which there's no long-term safety data, which doesn't provide protection against a disease that doesn't threaten 99% of the population. So there's progress. We just got to keep chipping away at it.
No, but I think we have to remain on guard. If not for a COVID type pandemic or whatever, for other ideologically based bits of science that come our way that we're going to be told for the public good we have to do this or do that or shut our industries down. Well, I can see this happening now with climate change. We can see the schism start to build between the West and the centralized East over climate change, and which way should we go with our fossil fuel reserves and our oil and gas industries. So we have to be very careful that we don't wind up with the same ideological idiotry once again. But
I think the next waves of attacks on our charter rights and freedoms. I'm not in the habit of making predictions, but I'll make one prediction. I think we're more likely to see attacks on our right to travel, movement, association, all of our charter rights and freedoms, in the name of saving the earth from the climate holocaust.
yes,
Based on the I think so far very much unproven thesis that mankind controls the weather. I would ask the question, if it's true that mankind controls the weather, what is it that the Romans did in the 4th century to cause global cooling? what did the medieval peasants do in the year 900 to bring about the global warming?
Yeah.
What did the medieval peasants 200 years later do to cause global cooling? What did we do in the 1700s? What did mankind do to pull ourselves out of the little ice age? Just the past 2,000 years, we've had this global warming and cooling, and we need to ask the questions. Why do you believe that mankind controls the weather? And if that's true, how do you explain global warming and cooling and warming and cooling and warming and cooling in the last 2,000 years?
In the past.
So
And I think you're right. I think it's already upon us. We can see that we've already got EV mandates at 2035 timeframe. We Canadians can't drive gas-powered cars anymore. They can't buy them. All that's going to be available is EV cars and I don't think they've really thought that one through either. But I guess we're already in the midst of that kind of a new issue that has to be fought in the name of the public good. Yeah.
Well, people need to keep on, speaking out, exercise your charter freedom of expression. Now, sometimes, and I don't pretend to be very good at this myself. I'm probably, too harsh and blunt, but ideally, if you just ask questions politely, I need to get better at that myself, right? But on this whole climate thing, it's like if it's true that mankind controls the weather, how would you explain the global warming of 1,000 years ago? Was that caused by mankind?
Yeah, just
ask the question.
I say that all the time. I say all you have to do is ask questions, because if you can ask questions and they're not answering you, or they're giving you kind of dumb answers, well then they hang themselves in their own petard by simply asking them the questions. Before we go, I wanted to just make one connection here. You talked about the 12-year-old girl that was vaccinated against her will, and against
she wasn't. It got overturned by the Saskatchewan Court of Appeal, fortunately. So but it was still scary to have a trial judge be this fanatical on just accepting the media narrative. But anyway, got overturned on appeal. Yeah.
Here we talk about this, something dear to my heart. I got 6 grandkids. Are actually putting our little ones forward for these experiments, for these, in the name of the public good. My granddaughter has to get injected with this vaccine, or this or that, the other thing. I know that you're actively involved in involving yourself with a case that is coming forward in Alberta, I believe, about the government's legislation against gender affirming care to little ones, to minors. That apparently is being argued against now in court, and here we have a case where, boy, you're subjecting little ones to irreversible surgeries that are down the road they could very easily regret. I mean, the very, very serious surgeries that could ruin their lives, and all in the name of, I think, ideology. What is happening there with that particular case? I know you have an interest in it.
Well, the Alberta government, Premier Smith in particular, she announced in, I think it was January 2024. So this is like a year and a half ago. She said, we're going to be developing new policies whereby there will be no children under 16 cannot take puberty blockers or opposite sex hormones. And the two are related insofar as once kids take puberty blockers, the vast majority of them also start to take opposite sex hormones, right? So the boys will start taking estrogen, which has effects on genitalia, on physical development. Girls will start taking testosterone. They can get permanent facial hair, permanent deepening of the voice. And most gender confused children who feel either uncomfortable about or deeply unhappy with their physical sex, they feel there's not an alignment, right? Like they're a girl trapped in a boy's body, or they're a boy trapped in a girl's body. The children who feel that way if they go through normal puberty, the vast majority come out at the other end and they are okay with their bodies after they've gone through puberty. Puberty is very difficult. There's lots of anxiety. A lot of those young adults will be same-sex attracted. So what the Alberta government announced and then subsequently passed into legislation is that you don't get puberty blockers or opposite sex hormones or surgery under the age of 16. If you're 16 or 17 years old, and most of the people at that age range will have gone through puberty already, with the permission of parents, you can get puberty blockers, possibly opposite sex hormones. No surgery until you're 18. So full stop on that. So that's a very reasonable policy that aligns with the international research. It aligns with what the United Kingdom and Sweden, Norway, Denmark, Finland, the Netherlands, Italy, Germany, all of these countries have either banned giving the puberty blockers and opposite sex hormones to minors. They've either banned it or they've severely scaled it back. So this is being there's a gay rights group called Egal Canada, and they are saying that this somehow violates the charter rights of children to have these kinds of drugs available. And they scored a victory. Friday, June 27th, the court released an interim injunction so that the government's new policy is temporarily suspended while the court action proceeds. And we'll see what happens.
Well, I hope that that gets argued ferociously. That's crazy. I mean, a young child, you're impeding on his charter rights to, mutilate himself or herself. That's absolutely incredible. That given that reason, I guess 14-year-olds should be allowed to drive, I guess. But there you go. There you have it.
Well, it's this crazy idea that self-identification trumps reality, and we can just self-identify ourselves into whatever. This is why, similar issue, the Justice Center has challenged the federal government's current policy that's been in place since 2017, allowing convicted murderers and convicted rapists to transfer into a women's prison the moment that they declare themselves like, I feel like a woman, I identify as a woman. That's all the dude has to say. It doesn't even need surgery. So these guys with fully intact male genitalia say that they identify as a woman, and immediately, it might take a few days or a few weeks, but basically they can transfer right into a women's prison based on identity. And so we've taken the federal government to court because there are reports of women privacy violations, getting harassed, getting stalked, getting leered
raped,
at.
I hear. Raped.
And right on through to sexual assault. So lots of battles to be fighting. But there's the same issue there where people say, well, if you're a girl and you identify as a boy, identity trumps reality, but we're going to make reality conform to that. And we're going to put you on puberty blockers. So you won't get your period, you won't grow breasts. We're going to put you on opposite sex hormones. You're going to get a deep voice and facial hair. And then, after you're 18, we're going to try to give you a fake penis. It's horrible. These kids need help to align so that okay, so why do you not feel happy? Why do you feel unhappy with your body? Why do you feel that you're a boy, and explore it and help people to get.
Well, they've kind of covered that off with Bill C4 a couple of years ago, where they came out and said, well, conversion therapy legislation doesn't allow you to talk to even your own child about, do you want to have a second thought about this? So legislation.
And that was supported by the Conservative Party of Canada, supported the legislation.
100%.
So now we have Criminal Code section 320.101. and if I've got the section number wrong, it's in the criminal code. The conservatives voted for this along with the liberals and the bloc and everybody else.
Yeah.
It is criminal to help a teenager to be happy about their body that they were born with.
Yes.
You're not allowed to help them with that. And shame on the Conservative Party and all the parties for voting to criminalize this with Bill.
We'll talk about rule of law. Talk about rule of law. I note that same legislation says it's quite okay if you want to advise a child to go from the traditional to the non-traditional. That's okay. You can convert that way. You just can't convert or advise a child on being au fait with their own biological sex. You can't do that. I don't know. That it's just absolutely crazy. But it's, as you say, it seems like ideology is having its day over us in this present day Canada. And I, as you say in your book, I think there's a lot of parallels there with the 1930s of Germany.
Well, Canadians can fight back. There's an action plan in there, and one of the points is in the book Corrupted by Fear, there's an action plan. One of the points is take your kids out of the public schools where they're getting taught this garbage. If your kids are getting, if your 5-year-old in kindergarten is getting, if your 5-year-old boy is being told in kindergarten that he might not be a boy and he might be a girl, that's child abuse as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. If
If you're a grandparent, you can offer to support your kids. And of course you should not, as a good grandparent, you should not interfere with the parenting, but you can be an encouragement and say, look, you know what, if you want to put your kid in a private school, if you want to put your child, my grandchild, in a private school, or if you want to homeschool, I will do my utmost to help you out in any way I can. I'll come over and babysit the baby while you're taking a few hours doing the, or financial support. So this is really important to protect our children from getting indoctrinated into ideology. And that's an important part of turning the culture around.
Well, that's great advice. Thanks very much for that, John. Okay, I guess I'd like to remind people about your book, Corrupted by Fear. It's out there. It's ready for sale. I got my I should show. I got my own copy here. It's well earmarked, underlinings all throughout it. So thanks again for joining us in Hot, John. It's been a real pleasure, and much luck in your travails, with getting us back on the right path in Canada. Because, I think we're wandering down the wrong one right now.
We can do it. Thanks so much for having me on your show. It's a real honor, and happy to come back, whenever you like. I know C2 is Bill C2 is going to be a big step towards turning Canada into a police state. So if you want to talk about that, but again, thanks for having me on your show.
Okay, John, until next time.
Until next time, take care.
Bye.